Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Monotype and Olapic. We're excited to share with you a discussion about the 3 trends redefining modern CMOs with special guests from Adidas and Firmenich. My name is Rachel Brown. I'm the content strategist here at Olapic, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items on how best to participate in today's session. First, during the webinar, the audience will be in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature at the top left of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions at the end. But if we don't, we'll be sure to follow up with you and answer individually. Last, feel free to tweet at us or quote anything from this webinar using @Olapic or @Monotype or our respective hashtags, and please follow us on social channels as well. If you'd like to revisit the discussion or share it with a colleague, don't worry, a recording will be sent to you after the webinar via email. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you today's speakers. Brett Zucker is Monotype's CMO and is responsible for the company's marketing strategy, product portfolio, and market demand. Prior to Monotype, Brett was the CTO at Bridgeline Digital, providing product management and overall business strategy. Asha Talwar is the Director, New Business Development and Licensing Worldwide at Firmenich. Her expertise spans across fashion, beauty, and startups, and previously she led global marketing roles at Estee Lauder Companies and Coty. Gavin Cowley is the former Marketing Director of Adidas South Africa and currently works as a marketing consultant and is a member of the CMO Council and on their Africa board. In the next 30 minutes, we will discuss the emergent marketing trends and strategies CMOs will need to know and address to ensure technological and cultural relevance that will impact the success of their business now and to the future. And with that, I'll pass it over to Brett to get started.
All right. Thank you, Rachel. And I think we've got folks across the globe here. So good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be. I appreciate the time and you all joining. Just real quick to set some context for today and a bit more about Monotype for those of you that are not familiar. If you click through. We have a 100-year-plus legacy, right, in Type, and I'm not sure folks may or may not know, but Type is a business, and so if you look at the drop-down menu in most fonts, in there are ours, and it's IP that we license and for brands. And if you click to the next slide, you probably have interacted with all of this in just a short few hours of your day, right? Some of the biggest and most well-known brands in the world are using our Type as part of their brand DNA. And so for us, really, the focus as a company, if you click through, Rachel, the focus as a company is around 3 key areas. And these are topics that we typically talk to our customer base and go around the world speaking at these types of events. The first one is your expression, right? And all 3 of these are really germane to the conversation today. This is your DNA as a brand. And so there's lots of different assets. It could be fonts, color, imagery, voice or messaging. And so for us as a company, we focus on those visual assets. That could be the text or font, like in a word mark, images, specifically around user-generated content, and that's going to be relevant certainly today. And then certainly where folks are interacting inside messaging apps and other branded assets like stickers and emoji. And so that brand DNA is then used to broadcast out to your customer base. And the second value proposition that we work within is called engagement, right? These are all of the customer touch points where you are working on brand fidelity. How do you make every interaction with your consumer on brand? And so we have different technologies that either render scalable type on devices and screens like mobile devices and cars and AR, VR, and all sorts of different areas. But we also have embedded software that allows you to engage with your customers inside messaging apps, inside your websites, right? How do you build value with your customer? And then, of course, it's all about the performance. How do we build brand equity, bringing in ROI and providing insight back to the other areas to make all of those perform better in this virtual cycle. So really, these are the three areas that we focus on and certainly are relevant for the conversation today. And let's take a look at an example with L'Oreal. So they are obviously all about imagery and brand equity, right? They use typography, they use visual assets as core to their DNA, but they've also expanded into apps and user-generated content by engaging with their customers in innovative ways. Right? Imagine you're collecting UGC imagery with a hashtag beauty, right? So you're out on Instagram, and looking for feedback from your customer base, right? And then collecting all of that and using machine learning within an app that might take a selfie and turn it into product recommendations by looking at real customer imagery that represents beauty, right? And that's a great way to not only democratize high-performing content, but also build relationships with your customers. And so we partnered with the Future Lab on research into the changing role of the CMO. And there were, we actually sat down, we talked with global CMOs, had conversations about things like artificial intelligence, how we change consumer behavior based on their current expectations, what new marketing technology exists. We identified three key trends that tomorrow's CMOs are going to need in order to be successful. And that really is the heart of the conversation. So I'm excited to have Asha and Gavin here to be part of this. And let's jump right into trend number one. So harnessing artificial intelligence effectively, right? Obviously, there's a lot of buzz around this, and it's for good reason. And if you click through to the next slide, you'll see 90% of us, right? Those folks in marketing plan to increase their spend on data analysis because it works. And one of the key reasons that I believe it works so effectively is because it removes those human errors and biases that we all bring, right? We have a notion of what imagery should look good. We spend money building studio content for what we think will work. And we inherently bring those biases to the table every day. And one of the great things about artificial intelligence or machine learning is it removes those. So a great example of this is we actually, with Olapic, we ran a hashtag campaign on Instagram called Mouthwatering with a global soup mix company. And what was amazing is as we started to curate those images and learn what resonated with people by click-throughs and how long they stayed on those images, is that inherently our decisions up front about what we thought would work were wrong. And we repeated that same study across multiple customers, right? We found that, showing a photo with dark soup in a white bowl with the spoon in it that took over a certain percentage of the screen is what really looked well. We thought maybe imagery of folks, of parents or moms cooking with their children might work, but ultimately we found what worked. And we eliminated the biases and saw a 680% increase in interaction with the content that was machine curated versus human curated. And so I'd actually like to open it up. You probably all on the phone didn't realize you actually had to participate in this. There is no free lunch. So I would actually like to open it up to a quick question, which is, would you trust artificial intelligence data to run your digital marketing campaigns? And I'm curious to see, we've got a significant number of folks on here. So I'm curious to see sort of how this plays out. We'll bring the panelists in here to kind of see how this works. So I guess Rachel will give them another 20 seconds or so.
Definitely. Votes are still coming in.
I feel like whistling the theme to Jeopardy. So, all right, everyone should see a poll popping up. Awesome. There you go. Which is great to see, actually, that the majority of you are thinking about AI and using that data. It's curious that it's a little bit closer than I thought it might be. So maybe if we turn this over to you, we'll start, Gavin, maybe part of the reason that there's some hesitancy here is that folks see AI as a threat to either the CMO or the creative or marketing organization. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, and welcome to everybody as well. First, I'm using my voice from the deep south of Africa in Cape Town. I'm not too surprised by that response, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there's still a fair amount of concern that many people still have with just how they can incorporate AI in a meaningful way in their businesses. I think also maybe if we read the question there, it talks about running your digital marketing campaign, and maybe the phraseology might suggest that it's a complete takeover. From a data point of view, there's absolutely no question that AI can provide us with concrete and meaningful statistical analysis that we can take forward with us. So first of all, I don't think that AI is a threat to the role of the CMO and the creative teams. I see it more as an opportunity because, we do still have a situation in South Africa, and research that we've done through the CMO Council has shown as well that marketers are still concerned about the role-changing needs currently and, of course, going into the future. And 50% of marketing executives currently feel that their job is on the line if technological investments are not successful. So you can see that, people are, I think, pulling and pushing a little bit with just how it's going to impact them individually, I guess, but also how it's going to impact the business. And I think we're going to get to a situation where we might have a little bit of an adapt or die situation. And I do believe as well that the future, in many, many ways too, with bringing AI positively into a business, we'll see a lot of emerging youthful forward thinkers, people that are digital and techno savvy, that will certainly complement that comes out of, the data analysis, so to speak. But the important thing, Brett, you spoke about it a little bit earlier too, AI removes the subjectivity and the emotional influence decision making. However, there is still a need for creative input and brand protection in particular. I think brand protection is the one element that we have to be very, very careful with, where currently, where CMOs will play a very, very formal role in ensuring, that the value systems and partner alignment are spot on, and to ensure that there's no hacking and, the use of information for military gain. We see a situation with Google at the moment too. You might have read about it or heard about it with Project Maven, where they've worked very closely with the US military with regards to drone technology. And Google employees are threatening to resign, saying that, this is technology for war, which is not a good thing. But if you look at the many positives, and there are just so many of them, from Google Assistant, in Africa where I live, health drones delivering blood can be just such a positive thing in a continent that, is still growing up in many, many ways.
Yeah, I think, Gavin, you brought up a couple of great points in there. I guess I'll start with the first one, which is as you think about, bringing these skill sets in-house, I'm curious if you see sort of a role for either folks to take on, a chief artificial intelligence officer, or certainly within marketing organizations with specialized expertise in AI, that adapt or die kind of a model that you mentioned. Do you see this kind of taking hold?
It sounds quite chronic, doesn't it? But I think, we're going to get to that situation where you can't just amble along. I think some very concrete decisions need to be taken. I think org charts in businesses are going to change somewhat too, to allow the three elements that we're discussing today to be properly looked after by the businesses. So I've got no doubt that the opportunities for example, a chief artificial intelligence officer will definitely be there. Now, whether you have a situation of upskilling your current staff, because new skill sets no doubt will be needed, and maybe current personnel within businesses as well can expand their portfolios. However, one's got to be very, very careful. I think we've all seen this in business before. If you end up doing a 50% job, it's not gonna work for you. And the other important element, I think, as well with AI and employment is that, there is a statistic that suggests by 2020, which is just 2 years away, AI will create right about 2.3 million new jobs, and about 1.8 million jobs will be lost or would become redundant as a result of that. So it's almost like quite a good balance. And if people are feeling very threatened by AI, as I said earlier, I think they should see it more as an opportunity.
Yeah, so I think when we get to topic number 2 for today, that's going to be a great point that we'll come back to, Gavin, in that, not losing that human touch for sure. But let's take a look at a case study, actually. Cosabella. So it's a U.S. lingerie company, and they replaced their marketing agency with an AI system called Albert. And it's interesting, right? They said they actually wouldn't go back to human marketers. And while it's probably extreme, I think it says a lot about the value of looking at data and taking those biases out. So a couple of interesting things to note, right? They used artificial intelligence to optimize their ad imagery, marketing, and media buying, like Facebook, search ads. And they use Albert to identify targets, keywords, and execute on the ad buys itself, right? So it's really interesting how they've turned this into sort of a machine-learned way of interacting with their customers. And, some of the data points here, right? Ads with humans perform 50% better than still life shots. And the system can actually alert Cosabella when a concept might be fatiguing, right? When its click rate is going down or the interactions are dropping, and they understand that either they need to secure more content or they need to change sort of the voice or message of it. So it really is interesting how they're looking at it. And ultimately, it's tripled its ROI, increased its customer base by 30% in 4 months. I mean, that's just unbelievable. And while that may not be the norm, and there's a lot that goes into it, I think it just shows the value that you can get with looking at artificial intelligence. And if you apply that to marketing, there's several ways that we can look at this. And so Olapic again ran an A/B test for Kayak. And so we looked at content on the left, you'll see is static. And then we also have some interactive content on the right that folks saw. And, the results speak for themselves, right? Increasing conversion rates by ridiculous 90%, reduction in cost per conversion of 40%. I think, as consumers, we all understand the value of either interactive or short form video and whatnot. But the data shows that actually happens. So how do you do that programmatically? A lot of the ad buys today are done programmatically. So how do you filter content dynamically into these ads? And there's a lot of technology out there to help that. But it also, AI can recommend the right level of incentives for influencers. So a lot of B2C companies especially are investing in platforms like YouTube, like Instagram, right, and the influencers there. And the way they do it is by training on historical data from millions of influencers, looking at what content is performing. So Asha, I'd actually like to bring you into the conversation here. And I know there's specific programs that you've been running, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how you see your business benefiting from AI.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think that, just to build on what Gavin was saying, there are people in the marketing, in marketing roles that are, feeling threatened about artificial intelligence. But what it's allowing us to do is have like exponential growth potential. I think when we think about the creation process, I work for a fragrance house, but we really touch all different facets of beauty. If you even think from the standpoint of formula creation, artificial intelligence could be an amazing tool that can be leveraged in conjunction with the creative visionary who is reinventing a formulation. I think that could be an area that we see brands across every single category in beauty working on. Another piece that is really critical to any brand's P&L would be in the manufacturing segment, how a brand's process can be streamlined and optimized by using artificial intelligence. And what this is going to allow is for even faster speed to market and more customer customization of products. And we're seeing brands starting to play with that. In the beauty industry, it follows fashion very frequently. And historically, we've been looking seasonally. We're starting to see the seasons break down, the impact of what's happening in fast fashion, or even, the kind of hype segment of all of these hot brands like Supreme and Off-White, et cetera. There is no calendar or seasons that we have to create against. And so if we can streamline and execute launches faster and use technologies to get us there, then it really changes the way we actually launch products to the market. It's interesting because most recently in the fragrance industry, Yves Saint Laurent had launched a new fragrance, a men's fragrance called Y. And in an industry where you often see celebrities and fashion models as the face or the spokesperson for a brand, here they featured an artificial intelligence researcher. So even there, we're starting to see these kind of new voices and spokespeople at the forefront of representing brands.
Well, that's actually amazing. Like an established brand with clearly a core DNA and established brand equity is using artificial intelligence to launch products. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Let's move on to topic number 2. So the first one is artificial intelligence, and the second one is probably the number one question that I hear in any of these types of forums. And it's around, have we ceded control of our brand to our consumers, right? Folks have a bigger voice now than ever before. Everyone has a platform. Everyone has a voice. What your consumers say about your brand speaks way louder than anything you can say. And that concept, often can put marketers off kilter, but really it's not about controlling your brand. It's helping your advocates speak on your behalf. And so let's take a look at Lego for a second. And something that's really interesting here is they started out trying to build their own online club for their customers. They have such an amazing and loyal following. And they said, we want to own that community and that audience. And they looked around, they actually found, it's really interesting, they found an online community of already, brand savvy, evangelists who had gotten together. And so what they ended up doing, and instead of ignoring that existing community, they embraced it. They brought those folks in. They actually made them part of their community and built from there. And so, they have a global network of fans creating and submitting ideas and engaging with each other and speaking as advocates on behalf of Lego. And rather than try and steal sort of the conversation, they embraced where the conversations were naturally happening. And an interesting statistic from this is that the majority of millennials believe that they do have ownership within the brands that they are fans of, right? We all know that to be true, right? We have our affinity because, we express ourselves with alignment of a brand's DNA, right? That's why you wear a certain logo on your shirt or your hat or a sports team or whatever it is. So with that, I'd actually like to open it up to the second question today, and ask you all, so in the future, right, which areas of brand identity do you think consumers will have more control over? And so we'll give everyone 30 seconds. You should see the post or the poll right on your screen. We'll see if everything is as close as the last one. See, I could bring my biases into this and say, I think I know where this is headed, but we'll see. All right, how are we doing, Rachel?
We're good. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. Still have votes coming.
Awesome.
All right.
Let's see. All right. So, yeah, I think I agree with everyone here, right? More than half of you think both the tone of the brand and the visual identity of the brand. It's interesting. 3% actually said neither. We will have to dig into that to understand maybe around, the sort of vertical industry or maybe some of the regionality here as well. But all right, interesting stuff. So if we take that and we look at some statistics, right? There's 84% of people have said they buy a product from a company that was an advocate for an issue they cared about. Right? If you click through to the next slide, Rachel. Right? So whether we as marketers explicitly engage with this, ultimately our customers are buying because they believe in the brand. And so, you look at Kickstarter, right, and the success there. And, Yves Saint Laurent, which Asha had given as an example. There's other industry stalwarts like Bose that have even launched product on Kickstarter, right, to test that market. It's really interesting to see what people are doing. And even though that they care about the brand message and being part of that brand conversation, right, we as CMOs and marketers have to be the source of the DNA and the core values. And we need to embrace the two-way conversations with the customers and make sure our brand's DNA is well established and sincere. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists again. I'll start with you, Gavin. So in terms of giving customers direction, and giving them sort of license to act on behalf of the brand and be an advocate and voice, how can brands know if they're going too far? What is too far, right? What is too much?
Yeah, Brett, you touched on a point as well, just in leading into this, in respect of co-creation. And, I think everybody needs to clearly understand what the words control and influence mean in the context of their business. So to what extent, are consumers or customers controlling what you're doing or influencing what you're doing? And, that's very much in the hands of brands too. So the brands themselves would provide the platforms, whatever those platforms might be. I still believe that, influence is a strong enough word, and that should be an integral part of that, because I think ultimately too much is quite hard to define. Maybe it's a hybrid, of created needs that sort of balance the co-creation with values and identity, which I think to a certain extent are not negotiable. So just to give you a clue there as well, I actually voted for tone of the brand, doing my little bit as well, because I do believe that visual identity still is very, very strongly controlled by the brand itself, but not necessarily not influenced. So for me, tone would open up a lot of extra avenues. But I really like the idea, as well as we see on screen there, of buying a product because the company was an advocate of an issue they cared about. And I'd like to just pass a comment about the brand that I worked for a very long time, Adidas, in the sporting world. And that is the element that I do believe will be very important going forward too. We talk of the 4 P's of marketing. We talk about a 5th P being planet. And I think environmental cause marketing is an element that a lot of people are jumping on with as well. And Adidas has done a really, really good sort of cooperation with a brand called Parley for Oceans. And, with 8 million metric tons of plastic going into our oceans throughout the world every year, we have a major issue, and Parley for Oceans are very much geared towards, trying to change that. So Adidas's role in this is that a lot of that plastic, or at least some of it, is being turned into product. So footwear is being made from plastic that is recycled from oceans. And last year, in 2017, Adidas sold 1 million pairs of those shoes. So I think there again, Wow. If we look at cause marketing, that is really quite special. And I'd like to just also pass a comment with, from the research of the CMO Council, that only 10% of marketers currently tie their customer experiences back to business goals. So again, I think companies and brands need to be very, very clear how they go forward in respect of all the things we're talking about. My apologies. And, a better understanding.
It's a live event. It's a live event, Gavin. It's okay.
Yeah. I think a better understanding of customer needs will come about with more efficient interactive programs, and programs like the classical CRM programs, the customer relationship marketing. Broadly speaking, Asha spoke a little bit earlier. She used the word speed. And I think this has become a really important element in the go-forward processes of being able to create, the right avenues for our brands. Right. The world is no longer a Queen Mary, taking its time to swing around, but it's all about speedboats, So speed is, and AI is providing that for us. And I think also with consumers or customers, whichever way we want to define them, we have a great opportunity as well of making sure that whatever processes we put in place are not time consuming and they can help us with speed to market.
Well, so you mentioned, Asha, actually brands and sort of the beauty vertical. I mean, that is literally our face to the world. And so, people definitely have a voice there. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Sure. I think I have 2 quick examples to share. I mean, we know that beauty brands and retailers, you really see the consumer as an evangelist. There's a new millennial destination for beauty that launched in 2017 called Riley Rose. The daughters of the founders of Forever 21 created this concept. And you will see on Instagram many times them asking their community, what type of brands should we have in our store? They just go out and let the consumer help them curate and figure out what to carry and buy for their point of sale. Separately, we see a similar kind of dialogue happening with Glossier, which is kind of the bright star in the beauty industry because they've taken this digital direct-to-consumer model and done tremendous things with it. Last year, Emily Weiss, who's the founder of Glossier, was at the Women's Wear Daily Beauty Summit. She said that 79% of their sales were organic peer-to-peer recommendations and earned sources. And what's so interesting about this brand is it's only available through their website and very specific retail destinations, but that are very strategic. So it's really started with a pop-up strategy. They have a showroom in New York City, and they just opened one in Los Angeles, and they're starting to open up additional territories around the world. But what they're doing is they're doing it through word of mouth, and they've started to build a group of reps. They have about 500 reps that are really their brand evangelists that are rewarded with cash and shopping credits. But what's interesting is like this model is what we've seen for years and years in beauty with Mary Kay and Avon direct to consumer, but they've completely reinvented it because not only are these consumers, helping tell stories about the brand, but they're building amazing content, showing, product usage and, where they're taking their products. You see, glossy on the airplane, how I create my look, and it's created this viral sensation, and it's really fueling their international expansion. So because they're in this constant dialogue with their consumers, it's really authentic, and it's helping them fuel their growth exponentially.
Yeah, that's, I mean, just seeing the results from that is, or hearing the results of that is amazing. Yeah, I think maybe something that we can do is, as far as helpful to the audience here, if you click to the next slide, thoughts on collaborating with your consumers, right? Where, we've seen examples of where not collaborating has gone very wrong, right? Think back years and years, the famous example of Coca-Cola, right? But even more recently, Snap updated their the Snapchat app and the whole UX, and had to revert back after users hated it. They signed petitions, right? And there's a significant backlash. And you could say, well, it's great publicity for them, but obviously putting your customers through that pain is never good. But really, the focus, the way we look at it, is capitalizing on the most loyal of your customer base and influencers who create content for you. So it gets back to this notion of the democratization of content, what your consumers are already saying without your permission, explicit permission or anything. They are representing you out in the world. And we have an example here of Hostel World, which is sort of like the Airbnb for the hostel industry. And so they've been working with Olapic now for a while, and they've actually moved 100% of their visual content, their website, email, marketing campaigns, to user-generated content. Why? Because they've proven that resonates much better with their consumers than studio or individual hotels or hostels sending in their content. And the reason it resonates is the same reason we all go to Amazon and we look at ratings and reviews. It's that peer-to-peer value or recommendation that we value, right? So how do you engage with your loyalists and turn them into activists? And one of those ways is by engaging with them on things like Instagram and your websites and others to provide those visual assets and content that you can then use, find that high performing imagery and use it in all your distributed channels. All right, so we're through two topics. We've got artificial intelligence, and we have building your brand with your consumers, not for them. The third trend is actually something that is probably sort of clickbait in terms of titles, but it's stop thinking like a traditional marketer. And let's take a look at some data to illustrate what we mean by that. And as consumers, if you click through to the next, thank you. As consumers, right, we are trained to have and expect instant gratification across every single customer touch point. Right, we expect instant responses from our brands. We expect certain levels of customer service, and there are companies out there, we all know who they are, who are driving that type of expectation. And so when we think about how brands have traditionally interacted with customers in that broadcast mode of either advertising or putting out content to be consumed, right? It's sort of that one-way conversation. And there's a delicate balance to be had, because ultimately, most people ignore a brand's message, right? They're overloaded with constant communications. We're trained to put in ad blockers and other things, right? To ignore these one-way broadcasts. And so we need to shift from that traditional marketing to a more of a model of, and get out of the product mindset where we're communicating about our product and into that experience mindset where we now have interactions with all of our customers at these various touch points that are two-way conversations. And so we'll open it up to our third survey here. And this is the last question. Which new type of marketing activation are you prioritizing, or would you prioritize for your organization? So I'm curious to see how people vote here. I actually won't say anymore. I don't want to introduce any biases into the survey here. Are we looking, Rachel?
Good. Just gonna wait a couple more seconds.
I'm very curious about this one.
Here we go.
Wow, there you go. Improving personalization. I mean, that's a huge, yeah. So it's interesting, you know, the personalization, that definitely means, you know, certain things to certain people. But I'm glad to see that one, right? It's making sure that we are interacting with our customers based on what they require, right? We're working customer back and thinking about what they need, not what we are trying to broadcast. All right, excellent. So if we think about, you know, from a non-traditional marketing perspective, how we stand out in these new spaces, right? We've got a really interesting example here, and I know Gavin's going to talk about it with the virtual shoe wall. But I think, you know, a lot of us have seen some new examples, right? Especially with AR and VR. And the amount of money that, you know, folks are putting into all the biggest companies in the world, Facebook with Oculus and Google with Cardboard and Apple, certainly with ARKit, you know, just the augmented real world, right? Virtual reality is great, and certainly will have its place, but you're still tethered to a particular, your couch or your seat or something. Augmented reality, where you're just out in the real world, where you're interacting with brands, is certainly going to be a key element that we need to think about as marketers. But we've seen folks like Wayfair and IKEA, right, creating interesting augmented reality apps that allow you to visualize products in your home. Brands will need to interact in these new spaces with their consumers for sure. So maybe, Gavin, we can start with you, and you can tell us about this really cool Adidas virtual shoe wall.
Yeah, sure, Brett. Just to pass a comment as well, I think you're a man of great influence, because our lead into that question, I think, influenced a lot of people to go with improving personalization. So extremely well done. but very true too. But very true. Yeah. Again, if one looks at, I'm a strong believer in visual movement. But one of the key things, if we have a look at the picture there, this Adidas virtual shoe wall, which by the way is not very current. It's been refined, but this was going back a couple of years when this started, and the whole drive behind it was very much around the fact that the brand could not showcase all of its products in a single store. So one way of being able to change that is through the virtual shoe wall, where you can actually load all of your product on there. But importantly, I think, yeah, is the interactivity as well of it, where you can turn the shoe around, you can look at the sole unit, you can look at the back of it. You've got all the information at your disposal, you know, at the touch of a button. And the full range is essentially on show there. So within a very short space of time, you're able to actually conclude your purchase if you wish to purchase a product, and everything is done or can be done without the initial needs of someone in store actually supporting you. So it's a very, very useful tool, this, I think. And, from a virtual reality point of view, we see so many things these days, in terms of wearables, headsets, video games, of course, but even watches these days that can actually steer your grocery purchasing, which would be great for me because I'm not very good at doing the purchasing. My wife, I've leave that very, very much to her. But these are the elements that I think are available. But the key attraction, if we look at augmented reality too, with a brand like North Face, the outdoor brand, with their cold chambers, their simulated mountains, bringing it very, very much to life. And I think the modern day consumer actually appreciates it because it sends out a very good message, of engagement, quality, trust, speed, whatever you want to say, market leadership. A lot of very, very positives that do come from that. And I think also, the helping force with virtual reality, with people, I think these days you can even have a virtual meeting with your bank and the banking staff in the comfort of your own home. But I would like to mention something else, which also took place some years ago in Monaco. I was at a conference, and it was a complete surprise to everybody, and it was an Adidas conference. And we were ushered into a room where there were a whole lot of men in white dust coats that looked like doctors. And we were asked to sit down, and our foot measurements were taken. And it was for the first time I found out that each of us have a foot of different sizes. And shoes were brought out, but not pairs, individuals. And the perfect fit was essentially what we got. And we were able to run across a treadmill with a shoe, just to ensure that it was comfortable. Then we went through to another room, sat down in front of a bank of computers, and essentially just put the colorways that we wanted, and the lettering as well to go onto the shoe, which was great as well. So you sort of put your name or your girlfriend or whatever you wanted on it. But it was a fantastic process, and within a week, that shoe was delivered to my home in Cape Town. So from a customization point of view, I think the consumer is looking for that. They're looking for opportunities to imprint themselves, in their own way. And that type of thing, I think, can make a really, really big difference for people. And even those that might find that they are under lots of pressure, these days you can do window shopping as well through touch screens and interactive models and changing colors, within the screen of what's in the window of the store, and actually even, purchasing the product there and then. So there's so many of these elements, and that's why that question, I think, when we talk about advertising through new channels or personalization, augmented reality and virtual reality are going to become a very, very strong part of our future, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, you spoke about the North Face example. I mean, even the shoe buying example, right? These have really morphed away from the products themselves and into the experience that you have with the brand. And so, we're certainly not the originators of that shift from product to experience, but I think it's just illustrative of how, consumers' behavior and alignment with a brand is focusing on the experience. So, Asha, I know you've got a couple of examples as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic.
Sure. So augmented reality, has been appearing in the beauty industry, I'd say the last couple years, but really is at the beginning of its journey. I think last week, Target actually announced that they're going to be implementing AR tools as well as a concierge service so that you can virtually try on products. And, I think that in especially the beauty industry, what's happening is the way the consumer shops has shifted. Consumers don't have a lot of time to experience and try at counter or at point of sale. So you need to give them new tools to be able to have the experience, whether it's at home or even, in the stores. And the fact that you could, try on an entire makeup look with a reasonable degree of certainty that the color could look okay on you, really helps drive purchase. Same with a new hair color. I mean, why not? And it's interesting that Target is doing this because they're really catching up to prestige brands, because we've seen that, you know, brands like Estee Lauder, or companies like Estee Lauder and L'Oreal have been looking at this. But this is still, you know, very much at the beginning. I think also it's a way that we can elevate what's happening at point of sale as well, because the traditional model of going and talking to, you know, someone at a counter, having them take you through an experience. Not all consumers, especially millennial consumers, want those traditional services anymore. So it's shifting and changing. Another thing that we're seeing too that, you know, is bringing innovation and technology into brands are all of these incubator programs. We see it. Target also announced it's their second year of Target Takeoff. We know that, you know, there's investment arms at Unilever. There are, you know, Sephora, also L'Oreal, all investing in new technologies to enhance and change the experience and interaction with consumers and products. So I think that, you know, it's a really exciting time for technology to be infused in the entire experience. It's not about walking away from retail at all, but it's about enhancing the retail experience and really changing it to make it more experiential and relevant for today's consumer.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I think first off, thank you to Gavin and Asha, both of you, for your insight. I think there are some key takeaways for today as we kind of come in for a landing here. You know, the three different themes that we've talked about, right? Artificial intelligence, you've got, you know, creating your brand with your consumers, not for them. And then, you know, certainly looking at this last section, you know, is absolutely something to think about. We've got our CMO report that you can read more about it. But ultimately, I think that the key elements to take away are leveraging this experience that you have with your consumers, making sure that brand fidelity at every customer touch point is there, that you are engaging with your customers to not only convey your brand's DNA, but also to make sure that you tap into your loyalists and let them speak on your behalf as advocates. And so hopefully you all took some good items away from this session. And with that, I'm going to actually turn it back to Rachel, and we'll have a little Q&A. So if you all want to use the chat window to post some questions, we'll certainly open it up to our panelists.
Awesome.
Rachel?
Yep. Thank you so much, Brett, and to Gavin and Asha for all the great insight. For the last few minutes, we're going to open up the floor to some questions. There's a Q&A box where you can submit any questions you have for our panelists. Again, we may have a lot of submissions, so if we don't get to them all, we'll find a way to respond to your question post-webinar. A few have come in, and it looks like the first one is for you, Gavin. As a marketer, you know, what do you think the biggest trend affecting brands will be in the next 5 years?
Rachel, sorry, could you just repeat that again?
Yes, it was as a marketer, what do you think the biggest trend affecting brands will be in the next 5 years?
For the next 5 years.
Yeah, yep. In the next 5 years. Yep.
In the next 5 years. Interesting. There's probably a couple of things, but the first one that very much comes to mind, which maybe is embryonic in a way, or maybe it is casting over what's already been said. I do believe that there are two things that I'd like to mention here. The one is what we term outside-in marketing. Many brands throughout the world today have driven essentially their marketing programs and their strategic processes from the inside out. What we've learned today in all three of the subjects that we've packed in is very much the need to embrace the consumer, allow the consumer into your house, and to be able to bring what they have to offer to help you become more operationally efficient and a better brand overall. The second one for me would be very much a focus around mobile. I think the mobile applications as a driver going forward are going to provide so many elements for brands as well as consumers. And if those two elements could be, strongly looked at, so outside in marketing and just how you utilize mobile in all the different ways in which we've discussed this evening.
Awesome. We have one more question that came in for Asha. If you had to prioritize one new marketing activation for your brand, which would you focus on?
Sure. So what I would recommend is that you think about creating something experiential for your brand. It's not about focusing on only the physical point of sale or the digital aspects, but really integrating the two and thinking of a holistic approach, because they will feed each other and, really fuel, awareness and connectivity and really connect consumers to your brand.
Awesome. We have time actually for one more question, so I'm just kind of going to pose it to all of you, and whoever wants to jump in may. We had talked a little bit about preserving a brand's DNA, and one of our attendees wanted to know how can you ensure that you are preserving your brand's DNA in this kind of new landscape?
Maybe I can just pop in there.
Sure.
And offer my penny's worth. A brand's DNA is essentially something that's incredibly important. And with smart consumers that we have today, it's very easy for them to be able to see just where a brand's maybe going wrong. A DNA essentially suggests that you stay very, very true to who you are, the level of authenticism that you have as a brand, and the inflexibility, I would suggest, on certain elements, and I always think back to the brand that I represented, Adidas, and the value system and everything else that surrounds that brand has been brought since 1924 by the founder, and nothing has changed. So I think if you make sure that those elements remain when you actually wish them to do so, that you make sure that those elements are in line, and everything that is peripheral to that, left or right, essentially needs to form part of that. That's probably the best you can do, because some of the questions that we've asked ourselves as well is, how much is this, or, how far can we go with that? A lot of those answers I don't think we know right now. I think we'll find them out as we go forward. But as long as you remain authentic and you remain very true to who you are as a brand, I don't think you can do a lot more than that. You just need to adapt around whatever is essentially your formal DNA.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think I almost am hesitant to even add to that, but I think the key word, Gavin, that resonates with me is that authentic, right? It's your DNA. Your consumers can't change who you are and who you want to be. So being true to that core DNA is in your hands as marketers and as a CMO, but stay authentic, right? Your customers and potential customers will smell it a mile away when you're not. And so I think that word really resonates with me, is that authentic.
Maybe I can mention something else, if I may.
Go right ahead.
I just thought of something else, when we talk about the next 5 years, maybe just another thing to add to that is that I think what will become really important is creating the right balance between brands being customer-centric and channel-centric, because both of them will play quite an important role, but the balance, I would imagine, of those two will ensure success if you get it right.
Awesome. Anything else from our panelists?
Sure. Just to add, I think completely agree with this idea of being completely authentic to your brand identity. Your values and your tone should be really consistent. But I think long gone are the days of having, key messages that you always divert back to your messaging. It's important to be, reactive and spontaneous and relevant and always in communication with your consumer. but be consistent, even though you may pull different levers for different platforms in the way you communicate with them. I think that's really important.
Awesome. Well, that's great insight from all of you. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our webinar. So to all of our attendees, thank you. To all of our panelists, thank you for participating. Everyone, be sure to look out for a follow-up email from us soon with a webinar recording. And on behalf of Monotype and Olapic and our guests, thank you for joining us, and we hope you guys have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.